Hello, everyone, and welcome to really a new series. I'm going to call them a micro podcast, and it's really focused on the area of operations and organizations in this digital transformation age in healthcare, biotech, and pharma. That might sound like a lot to talk about. We want to see this, and we want to offer this as a series of strategy sessions that we hope will help decision makers make better decisions in this moment in which there's a great deal of hype around AI, generative AI, large language models, and their efficacy in healthcare. And then, secondly, we want this to be very case based, and we will stay true to that as we go forward. These discussions that I'm having with Varun, and Varun will introduce himself shortly, is going to really touch on that organization operational side and that technical integration digital transformation side. And we could talk all day long on that on a high level, but we were grounding it in real case studies as we go forward. So I just want to welcome everyone to this moment and to these cases, and I'll turn it over to you, Varun.
Well, thank you for having me. It is an honor. I've been following your work. My name is Varun Paul. I'm an operational excellence expert, a process improvement person who goes into mainly biotech and healthcare related companies and usually runs internal consulting teams. What we do is we find the problem or we're given the problem by leadership, and then we put the plan in action to address that or the strategy, and then we live it. We implement it and we stick with you, unlike traditional external consultants. So that's been my background across biotech, in different parts of biotech, from manufacturing to drug development, and in healthcare, both on the direct hospital operations side, but also on the clinical trial side. So I bring a myriad of tools and methods to bear, from Lean, Six Sigma, Agile, you name it, and customize those to fit the situation at hand.
That's great. And Varun, can you introduce the case that we're going to talk about today? And just to remind everyone on this, is that Varun is going to be speaking to, so I'll say resources, operations, the whole organizational piece, as much as we can touch on in this brief time. And I'll be speaking to the AI digital transformation. I do think there's going to be a lot of crossover, but we really want to offer those two sides of this coin.
Sure. So we'll call this case the Mavericks, and it takes place at a very large multinational drug developer, a biotechnology company, and that has all phases, if you're familiar with clinical trials, from the initial phase all the way to commercialization of a drug. And this case takes place primarily in the phase 2 to 3 and onward area of drug development. And I will call this organization Acme to protect the innocent. And Acme Pharma engaged me, recruited me to come in and solve a principal problem. It was a problem that for decades they had been facing and hiring very expensive external consultants to come and solve. And that problem was, why do we take so long? Why are we so slow? And what had happened was a myriad of different internal and external folks got this conundrum, from the chairman to the chief medical officer, et cetera, and approached it in ways that did not really yield results. And so when I was brought in, it was kind of a thought to marry that idea of process improvement, operational excellence, organizational design, and strategy in this research and development area. And so what I did was I said, well, let's step back and take a look at what has already been done. And what had already been done was a lot of, you need to just buy this technology, buy this solution, bolt it in, these one-offs that don't sustain and don't really attack the central problem. And so I went back to basics and studied these solutions and came up with a proposal. I said, we don't know what our process is for why we're so slow in the drug development process.
And Varun, I'm going to jump in on you just a second. Just for our audience, can you define what the problem is? The problem that I'm hearing is that clinical trials are too slow and therefore
Correct.
Too costly. Is that the general problem?
We're too slow and time is money. And we're in an environment where, as this big pharma company, there are these little startups that can do things faster and better. And we're all ultimately competing for not just FDA approval or regulatory approval, but for patients. Because without patients, there's no trial, because then you don't have the data to support whether your treatment has efficacy. And so I took a step back and I said, let's go back to basics, first principles. How is a drug made in our environment? How do you do this at Acme? And I went through and I did a really deep dive and process mapped everyone's version of how the drug development process at the institution works. And we did it for an average drug. There were a lot of different indications. I wanted the average. And of course, I got 20 different answers and 20 different maps. And what I did then was try to bring people together to say, we can't even align on our baseline. And then we have this goal or this problem. There's a huge gap here. All the solutions and ideas to resolve this never looked at how is the work being done. Do we all agree? They just jumped into solutions. So let's make sure we understand our baseline. And by doing that, that kind of galvanized the organization to start working with each other and coming to my mapping sessions where the front end of the process is talking to the very end of the process. And we're coming together and understanding in reality, this is how we do things. And these are all the people involved. And throughout this exercise, many months and huge process maps later, we had a baseline. And that baseline was a burning platform. You could visually see that our process was extremely complicated, was extremely slow. And then we were able to elicit people who had just come into the organization and had done it differently. And we could start visually bringing people together and say, hey, right here in this area, we can cut the time down. We can deploy, we can free up people's time so they can focus more on other things. And notice that nothing that I have said thus far has anything to do with AI, machine learning, or these fancy, products that cost so much. It's about bringing people together, understanding the baseline, and then aligning on what the process is that needs to be improved. Those subsequent conversations about technology and platforms come after this. And so
Varun, was your experience that some of those conversations around machine learning, full stack software, optimization of trial design, those were coming in early or being purchased, or M&As were being engineered when a lot of this work you're describing had not even been done?
Correct. They were jumping ahead.
Okay.
We didn't know how to crawl or walk, and we wanted to go sprint. It's going to be a disaster. And it had been.
One more question, Varun. Sorry, I'm asking a ton of questions. And so in this mapping where different departments started speaking, it sounds like for the first time, so there was knowledge sharing. Was there any discussion around sharing of data? Because obviously in pharma, there's some silos when it comes to data and also knowledge, which you were breaking down.
Right. This was the first time where we broke organizational and data related silos. Where you're the first time where you had the folks at the end of the process who want to collect data saying, hey, let me share with you historically what we've seen, to the folks up at the front writing the clinical protocol. And there was a marriage going on. Then we had the real world data application, or real world data group, who was kind of doing some very cutting edge stuff. They were now able to plug in and understand how they could better deliver data to this entire process, because now we had aligned on a baseline. They could see it and understand it. Knowledge about the process existed in silos. So you'd have a division or a group within this process. They understood their area, but they didn't really understand how in the process they were handed their next step. They didn't really understand then what happens when I hand it over, what happens over there. And that to me was very curious, that this very large company for so long was able to pump drugs out without doing this baseline assessment. And, it had been because for a very long time, they were the only kid on the block, so to speak.
So
Now
what I'm hearing is that there was handoffs. not collaboration, and handoffs with sort of black boxes. In other words, this work had been achieved. I'm handing it off for you to take it to the next step. And there was not a deeper understanding of what that handoff was, or even buy-in sometimes. Is that correct?
Correct. I'll give you an example. There was a vendor that was brought in many years prior to my arrival that was going to do, content redevelopment, an automated system that you just punch in a few things and it can start creating the clinical protocol for you. Sounds good, but it did not succeed because it was a bolt-on solution. It wasn't plugged into a process. It wasn't socialized, and teams were buying it and using it on their own. It was not common across, and we started to get different kinds of protocols. There was variability in our output, which is not always a good thing. And so that was kind of a red flag that, hey, that approach isn't going to work. And what I found is that, all of these companies that have these technological products or have a solution, they're always hovering. They want to sell their product, they want to get in quickly and sell it. But it is up to the organization and the leadership and the team to do their homework, to understand their own area, to be collaborative, and then you bring in what the proper solution is. And that in of itself should be a process that is commonly understood. Who needs to be at the table? How is it going to be socialized? It can't just be IT or someone's pet project to bring in another, AI company, and it's not involving the voice of the customer, if you will, which are all the different groups that are involved here. So jumping ahead, what we were able to do is design a brand new process. And this process was extremely lean. And then to test it, what we did is we actually got actual clinical trials to go through this process from early protocol development onward. And we were able to shave off a few months of time, which was a huge leap forward in the amount of time we had done it, just by focusing on first principles. It is then, once we had proven this concept, that we said, okay, maybe we can get now more gains by adding more technology and more solutions. And instead of me going out or the clinical head going out and shopping for, you name it, AI, machine learning platform, we brought in the right people, because now there was this culture that had developed of not silos, but a round table. And so we had folks from IT. We would bring in folks, from finance to understand the ramifications. And we would go through and look at different solutions rather quickly. And we did select one around computer vision that would help us with the clinical protocol. And that gave us a few more weeks of speed, because we had done this in a planful way. And some people might say, hey, this sounds bureaucratic. It's not agile enough. Well, they had been doing it the other way and they didn't get anywhere. This approach allowed us to speed the trials. And I think the takeaway here is it's about the people, it's about the process, and it's about rolling up your sleeves and bringing everyone together to say, yes, we understand the problem, but do we understand the same context? Is my context of the process the same as yours? Until that alignment happens, you may have the best solution in the world, whether it's a technology solution or a methodology. Unless that upfront work is done, it's not going to be sustainable. I don't know if you found that in your experience.
Oh yeah, very much so. So there's kind of interesting pieces here. So in this, looking at the clinical trial, and you're pretty much looking at it end to end. I don't think you're including commercialization at this point, but nonetheless, getting to and through phase 3. That idea of going from discovery, development, and all the way through the trials is there's so many different, I'll say, departments and teams that are a part of that. And I think people outside of pharma don't really understand what you're, in other words, the kind of alignment and comprehensiveness of that alignment that you need to get. What I would say in my experience is that, one, that alignment is rare. Two, it's highly necessary. And three, it does need to be aligned not with the purchasing computer vision, analytics, gradient boost type algorithms, or whatever you're actually using to gain some sort of speed and accuracy. But you need to have the data scientists and engineers at the table so that you're framing the problem not only as a process problem, but also as a data and automation problem. So how do you, and I think what happens in my experience is that once you start bringing people together, they don't share a common language, so there's frustration.
Right.
Two, there's not a common language across IT and digital transformation areas and machine learning research. I think that's changing, I have to say. I think that's changing. But now we've thrown in the mix generative AI and large language models, another whole set of myths and realities that I think people are scrambling to try to figure out. And so what happens is the purchases happen early before this
Hmm.
alignment or in the
Hmm.
process of this alignment. And my suggestion, I should say, just to add to what you're saying, Varun, my suggestion is that it's not so much you make those purchases, but you have those people at the table early. So you have the machine learning research, you have the people that's heading up digital transformation, you have the data engineers that know the state of affairs on those data silos. So as you're breaking down the silos across departments and expertise, you're breaking down the data silos that'll enable that alignment as you go forward. And so
Right.
I see a lot of this table setting is still needing a lot of work, and the sort of process and change, as you said, socialization, once some solutions have come up, to be super important for people to use, say, some automation that actually gets put out there. Otherwise, they're not going to use it. As you say, it'll get bolted on and also blown away. you know,
Exactly.
you
Um,
know. So that's a little bit of my 2 cents in that.
I want to double click on something that you said and convert it into what we do in my world. It's a socialization and getting everyone at the table. There's a term in Lean Six Sigma, and everyone's going to eye roll now, but it's called going to Gemba, which just is a Japanese term for simply going to where the work is being done. And for a knowledge-oriented research and development type of process, which is what the drug development is, where is the work being done? What we did is we took everyone together to where the work is being done, to the proverbial factory floor, which was that process map. And then I should add that we went and talked with manufacturing and went to the manufacturing site. We went and talked to the people that are literally at the lab, in white coats doing research, etc. But that representation or having that place where we all go, no matter who you are, it's the process that reigns supreme. And opinions need to then be justified by evidence. And everyone gets to understand what the other person does because now they've gone to their work site. And so in reverse with IT, what was really, I think, for the first time, IT was able to make really strong inroads into the clinical research space because they turned around and we helped them apply the same concept for them to educate the clinicians on how do our databases work? Where is information flowing? And we created those visuals so that now that friction that happens between teams is being cut down and we can move faster and faster. So that something that you said reminded me of that. So we pushed a lot of studies through. We started to get better and better, and more groups started wanting to be at the table. And so I think the next evolution we had was to have a strong program management office, a small team of strong, multifaceted project managers who understand that end to end and can then ensure that those folks, our internal clients, if you will, whether it's data, patient relations, et cetera, their work can be embedded into this design. So our design was constantly evolving and then we were executing. And, we were out doing something that hadn't been done before in the organization. So we were labeled the Mavericks. And we were testing some really exciting technologies, but there is a plot twist. Championship, sponsorship is so important. And in the beginning, we had a really good championship, really strong sponsorship. And I did a lot to bring those leaders to the Gemba, to the process map, and align them with their colleagues and the folks doing the work so that they could steer us forward. Well, there was a change in leadership eventually, even with all these positive results. And that change in leadership saw all of our sponsors next day were gone. New folks had come in, and they did not have it was not on their priority list to really understand and be taken through what we had done. And we kind of were just left frozen off on the side, waiting for direction and waiting for the organization to figure out its priorities. And all that investment and all that time started to decay. And it was an organizational miss. And at that time, what I decided to do was to say, hey, let's take these learnings and embed them in the teams themselves and get rid of this PMO that I had because championship isn't there. So I took on the championship. And my place in the organization was not high enough to really do that well. I knew that, but I wanted to give these shortcuts that we had learned to these teams. Well, a few years later, I got a phone call from someone who's, deep in the throes of this work, and they go, hey, your name keeps coming up. They're saying you were right. They shouldn't have put this project essentially on ice. And now they're feeling the consequences and the pain of that. And now imagine all that time and money and all those wasted opportunities that for something that we had invested in, abandoned by default, and now coming back, there's an immense amount of waste in that process. And that is how, when you do big projects, like you want to go get the next big AI solution, people already have heartburn from the last time. Hey, you didn't support me. I put my heart and soul into it, and then you abandoned this project. It doesn't matter who the leadership was over here. The organization abandoned this. Now you want me to do it again. There's going to be internal resistance. Oh, this is the same story again. This is flavor of the month. And so that is, I think, something that organizations, especially pharma companies, need to think about, is how do you sustain that championship, especially at that executive level? And again, this has nothing to do with a fancy technology solution or any technicalities. It has to do with people.
Understood. And so a couple, or maybe one question is, what's your major learning coming out of this when you think about it? Because it's a big organization problem where you have change of leadership. You have sometimes they clean out the C-suite. Sometimes there's just sea changes with shareholder, ups and downs. And so this is a big organization problem. And pharma, yes, but other organizations as well, that they sort of lose the really nuggets of gold that they've built up over time to reinvent those nuggets again going forward. So, and one more just observation, what you said is that although this is called the Mavericks or the Maverick case, this case study to me seems deeply conservative. I don't mean that politically in any way. It's like, it's very risk adverse. It's like you want to save time and money. The best way to do that is not to bring in new resources, but to actually re-leverage what you've actually already done, and then understand that and break those silos down. So to me, this is actually de-risking the organization on the the trial design and implementation sides of things. And so it's great that you got that encouragement kind of after after the zombies have arrived, that that the project really was well understood. Did you have any sense kind of post 2 years out that project one actually sort of relived again? And then my last question for you is, I'm sorry, I have lots of questions, but my last question for you, Varun, is what did you learn? Like, what are you carrying forward with this case now in your pocket?
Sure. Great questions. Is the project or its learnings moving forward? They are when we had a transition plan to return learnings specifically customized to each group, and they were using them, but unfortunately now in their silo. That come to the table approach was melting away, and there was yet another change in the C-suite, so to speak, and that has contributed to kind of being directionless in that regard. So people are trying to pick up the pieces and do it themselves. They're running into similar challenges. And so for me, the biggest learning to piggyback on that is that as much time and effort you spend baselining, you have to have a dedicated amount of effort on not only change management, but I would call it executive engagement, so that the culture of the organization, irrespective of who's in charge, is really embracing what you're doing, so that when there's turnover, the culture keeps this approach, initiative, or way of doing things alive. And I had not focused on that, primarily because I got heads down on, let's get in another study, let's push, on the metrics. I lost sight of, hey, we need to spend some time, and maybe I have to bring in a change expert, or I have to do this myself, in sustaining this and making it part of the organization's DNA. We didn't do that. We didn't market ourselves beyond, hey, look, we just passed this milestone X months faster. That's nice, but you really got to go on a roadshow with that. You really got to get people involved and engage the new leadership and make it their idea. All those things took a back seat to solving the question of why are we so slow, and proving we're getting faster. But again, that change management approach to operational excellence took a back seat, and I think that really did the organization a disservice. And if I had my way, I would go back and give that a little more oomph.
Completely understood. Varun, I want to thank you for bringing this conversation forward, and also bringing taking a charge of that process that you did, which itself is risky for you or anyone in your role to do that, because when you break silos, you step on so-called toes. When you
Right.
break silos, you actually open people's minds that may not want their minds open. When you break silos, you actually then leverage knowledge so people actually learn. So it's got this kind of pros and cons to it, and you got to be pretty resilient yourself and also you have to build a team that's resilient to actually make those insights actionable and really applied. And it sounds like you had the evidence. So to me, it sounds like this approach, and I know in our subsequent ones we'll talk a bit more about AI and bringing in some of the technology at some really right times. But I think you've already given some tools for people to think about when it comes to change management. And I think change management as a term is a very weak term. I think
Right.
it's change intervention and sustainability, so
Yeah.
that whatever the change is, that you're constantly turning around and looking at it from different perspectives, and then applying it and testing it along the way. It's an empirical science. Um, and I think it's really important what you've done, and I hope there's a lot more people doing what you've done.
Oh,
So
thank you. Yeah.
yeah,
My takeaway to any organization in biotech or healthcare wanting to do this is build that core team, that operational excellence team that's going to help you push your transformation, your strategy, and do some of that homework we did, and make sure you have the championship there. As pressures mount, drug pricing, the cost of R&D, et cetera, the many players that are entering these spaces, honing in on this and being really good at executing this is only going to grow in demand, even with the advent of AI, et cetera. So that upfront investment, it's possible. And you need to have hybrid skill sets. You need to have people like you, and you need to have good project managers and good process folks and good clinicians. It's that round table which you're talking about.
yeah. Well, thank you for bringing that roundtable to us, and for all the folks watching this. Is that we'll have a series of discussions like this, Varun and I, about the operational sides, the AI sides, as we go forward. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you
Take
very
care,
much,
Varun.
Ben. Bye.
Take care.